friends, and welcome to part 2 of the series where I talk about the 100 books that I'm reading this year. So the last episode we talked about the first 10 books that I read in 2020, and this episode I'm going to talk about books 11 to 20. Book number 11 was In the Afterlight by Alexandra Bracken, which is the final installment of the Darkest Minds trilogy. This book I also didn't give a rating for, just like the second book in the series, and the reason for that is because I had just very mixed feelings about this book. On the one hand, the parts that I liked, I really liked, and the parts that I didn't like, I just absolutely hated and was so mad about, I almost threw the book across the room. I thought the second book in the series was a little excessive, and this book was just that, like, times 100. It was basically like a quarter of the book really could have been just cut out and didn't need to be in there, and it just was like such a struggle to slog through. But then the parts that I liked were just like amazing and exciting and exactly what I wanted from the characters. Then like 70% through the book, she kills off my favorite character, which is not a spoiler because I'm not telling you who my favorite character is. But she does it in such a way that like you don't have a POV like witnessing the death, it's just like accounted to you afterwards. And so the whole time, like, right up until the last page, I was like, it's a joke, right? Like, it's just somebody didn't see right, and we're going to find out that, no, they're actually alive, and she was just playing us. But no, she really just killed off that character, and just did it in a way that the reader just, like, can't tell for certain if they're really dead or not. And I just, like, so I couldn't enjoy the entire last bit of the book, because I was just like, wait, no, they're not actually dead, right? And to find out they actually were was just like so disappointing. It just made me so mad at the series. This series was really a struggle for me because the parts that I liked, I really liked, but the parts I didn't like just made the whole thing almost not even worth it to read. So I'd say if you're gonna read this series, just beware of that. Maybe go in with low expectations. I'd say overall I'd probably give the whole thing maybe 3 out of 5. Yeah. But this book I just couldn't rate, because really I wanted to give it 1 star because of how mad it made me, but the parts that were good didn't deserve that. Book number 12 was The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. Now this was another book club book from my book club at work, and yeah, what a book this was. Wow. I didn't know how to rate this because honestly, like, I think I was just like so emotional after I finished it that I was just like, I can't give what I'm feeling a number scale. I think looking back on it now, I probably would give it like a 4 or a 5. But at the time, I just couldn't rate it. So the premise of The Bluest Eye, it follows this girl, Piccola, who's a young black girl in a neighborhood in the 1940s, I believe. So Piccola has an abusive father and kind of a really messed up home situation, so she goes to stay with this foster family. So a large part of the book is from the perspective of the youngest daughter of this foster family, and just all of the stuff that happens to Piccola and the other characters in this book, it's just, you know, it's painful, but it's necessary to read about. It's so necessary to know that these kinds of things were just commonplace at this period of time, and to a certain extent even happening today. Like, it's still ongoing. I mean, we have the Black Lives Matter movement for a reason, because it's clearly not over yet. So this book, it deals with a lot of heavy subjects. Like, I want to give it a trigger warning for sexual assault and abuse and all stuff like that. But I think ultimately it's a story about internalized and externalized racism. So the title, The Bluest Eye, is about Piccola wishing that she had blue eyes because she thinks she's ugly just because she's black and she has black features. And she grew up just always wanting to look like the dolls that she would see other little girls play with, the blonde-haired, blue-eyed dolls. And she thought that's what beauty was, because it was just so much internalized hatred towards herself, internalized racism and hatred of herself just because she was black. And all the other characters in the book reflect this in different ways as well. But yeah, such an impactful, important book to read. I can't say I was happy reading it because of the horrible things that the characters experience, but I'm glad I did. So book number 13 was The Rest of the Story by Sarah Dessen, who has been one of my favorite authors for a long time. Although I have to say that was more of a phase when I was a bit younger, like late teens, early 20s. I was just obsessed with her. And I've read most of her books, not quite all of them, but most of them. And this one, I would say, is very middle of the road Sarah Dessen. So if you're a fan of her writing, you'll enjoy it. But I wouldn't recommend you start off with this book if you've never read a book by Sarah Dessen before, because she has so many more that are just like so well done and excellent. I don't have the rest of the story, but I have my 3 favorite books by her, so I'm going to show them because I read everything from the library, so I have almost no physical books from what I've read this year, so I feel like I just want to show you guys some physical books. Alright, so this is Just Listen. It's a story about a girl who seems like she's from the perfect family. She's a model, seems like she would have no cares in the world, but it turns out her sister has an eating disorder, and she suffers a traumatic situation at the beginning of the book, and she has a hard time dealing with it all, but she's trying her hardest to just pretend like everything's fine. And then she meets this guy Owen, and they form a friendship, and through music she kind of gains a better understanding of how to process everything that she's going through and how to open up. So this is another one, Along for the Ride. So it's a story about a girl, Auden, who her parents divorce, and so she goes to live with her dad and his new wife and their new baby. And it's set, I think, in a beach town that a lot of her books are set in. Like, I think she's got other characters in this book that have appearances in other books that she's written. So she loves to do this kind of a vibe of like summer, near the beach, story about a teenager having some sort of problem with her family, and she meets a boy, and somehow the issues get resolved. Like, it's very classic Sarah Dessen, but in a great way. So this story, Auden is dealing with all of these family issues, and she can't sleep. She's like an insomniac, so she goes out for bike rides late at night all the time, and then she meets this guy, and And Lock and Key, it's another one of my favorites by Sarah Dessen. So it's a story about a girl, Ruby, who was living alone with her mom, and then her mom, like, abandons her or something. I don't know. I'm due for a reread on this one because the plot's a little bit fuzzy for me. But she ends up getting taken in by her sister, who she hasn't seen in years. So it's kind of awkward having to, like, get to know her sister again, and the sister's married and has a husband, so it's them getting to know each other as siblings again after so many years apart. So yeah, those are Sarah Dessen books that I would recommend that you start off with. But in the meantime, the rest of the story is just about this girl, Emma Sailor. She gets nicknamed Sailor by the people in the town, but her first name's Emma. And she goes to visit her dad at this lake. So one half of the lake is called Lake North, and the other half is called North Lake. And it's the same lake, but it's got 2 different names because one half is like the townies who live there all year round, and the other half is like the rich resort. So her dad's kind of from the rich side, and her mom, who has passed away, is from the poorer towny side. So she goes to stay with her mom's family for the summer, and she kind of gets to know who her mom is because her dad never really talked about her, and she didn't really know much about that side of her family at all. So she meets this boy that she used to play with as a kid, who she can't really remember that well, whose name is Rue. Yeah, it's not my favorite, but you get used to it. But it just reminds me of like Winnie the Pooh, like Kanga and Roo, so that's just what it makes me think of. But yeah, very middle of the road. I enjoyed it. I gave it 3 stars. But if it's your first time reading Sarah Dessen, please start with one of the other ones that I mentioned. Book 14. Where to begin with this one? So yeah, this is the phase of my life where I discovered Chandler Ainsley, the booktuber Chandler Ainsley, who, if you've watched any of her videos, you know that she's got a very particular taste when it comes to books. She's very into romance, and like the more outlandish the better. Like, she's very like, the questionable borderline books are like her bread and butter. So I don't know, and she's just got this great way of describing every book she reads that just like, even the ones that are like super out there and like, what the hell is this, you listen to her talk about them and you're like, oh, that sounds good. I should read that. So yeah, this is the phase where I really got into her videos. And so she was talking about Raze by Tillie Cole. So I thought, what the heck, I'll give it a shot. I regret that decision. I'm just looking at the review that I gave it and like, I was not impressed. I'm like, it was poorly written, unrealistic. The dialogue was ridiculous, and many of the plot points kept getting repeated to various characters over and over instead of just trusting the reader to remember what happened. I need to take a shower to cleanse myself of the trash pile I just rolled around in, aka the reading of this book. That holds up. So the premise of the book is that there's this character, Raze, who is this like underground fighter. He doesn't even like know his own name, like he can't remember his past, and he's just was sold to this underground fighting ring as a kid, and it's not just fighting, it's killing. So he's actually been like beating people to death for years and years to the point where he's practically a monster. On the other hand, there's this girl, Kisa, who is part of like a Russian mob family, and the mob family has like this fighting ring. So at some point Raze like escapes from his fighting den and he goes and wants to get revenge on somebody. I tried to block out most of this book, but he goes to the city that Kisa's in to try to get revenge, and they meet and like sparks fly. They're both incredibly sexually attracted to each other. Yeah, it's just, the writing was just bad. It was not good. So I gave it 1 out of 5 stars. Will never read another Tillie Cole book. And this was like the start of the journey for me of like, for a while I just kept trying to read Chandler's recommendations to be like, surely one of these is good. Surely one of them has to be enjoyable, considering she's like, this was amazing, I gave it 5 stars. And also the ratings on Goodreads are so high. Like this one, Raze has like 4.16 out of 5 stars. Like you would think that would be good. No. Book 15 was like a breath of fresh air after Raze, and I'm ever so grateful for Margaret Rogerson for writing this book. It was Sorcery of Thorns. Yeah, this was awesome. I love reading books about characters who love books, and that's exactly what this was. It's about this character, Elizabeth, who works in this magical library that houses grimoires, which are magical texts that are kind of enchanted and almost alive in a way. Like they whisper, they speak, they can move around. So Elizabeth is tasked with protecting these grimoires and helping visiting magicians to kind of peruse them, but also protect them from the outside world and people who might want to destroy them. So she meets this magician, Nathaniel Thorn, and the story is about the two of them. And Nathaniel also has this kind of mysterious, magical shadow servant who follows him around, who I loved. He was one of my favorite characters. His name is Silas, which, like, I love that name, Silas, so cool. So Elizabeth meets Nathaniel, and she's grown up like very, very sheltered, and she doesn't know much about magicians. She's never met one before, actually, so there's this really cute scene where she meets him for the first time, and she like falls out of the bookcase she's hiding and like grabs his hair and like rustles it around, and he's like, "What are you doing?" And she's like, "Oh, I was looking for horns." Like, it's so cute. Yeah, I loved this. Ugh, so great. Just really well written, fun, enjoyable. If you love books and you love reading about people who love books, this is definitely, and you're into fantasy, definitely check it out. Oh, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars, just in case I didn't mention that. Book 16 was This Savage Song by Victoria Schwab. She also has a pen name V.E. Schwab, which I think is for her more mature fantasy, and then Victoria Schwab is her YA fantasy. I think that's how it works. But this is part of a series, The Monsters of Verity, which I will not be continuing with. Yeah, I gave this 3 out of 5 stars. It was just very like middle of the road, okay. Like it's even now, like I was trying to think of what to tell you about it, and it's just like not very memorable. It's just, yeah, it started off strong and then it just kind of took a weird direction, and I wasn't a fan of the direction it took. Also, it doesn't really have any romance in it. Like there's not really a romance between the two main characters. And if you know me, I'm all about romance. It's got to have a love line in it. So yeah, it just wasn't my favorite for those reasons. Although the writing was good, it just wasn't the story for me. The premise of this Savage Song is there's this girl, Kate, whose father controls the human side of the city. And then there's also this boy, August, whose father, or I think it's his mother, controls the like monster side of the city. So basically in this world, violent acts create real monsters. So, you know, somebody getting murdered will create a monster, or a child being horribly killed will create a different type of monster. So there's 3 different monsters in this world. One that eats flesh, one that drinks blood, and then the kind that August is, which eats souls. And he does this by playing the violin. So it's music somehow makes him eat souls. So it's like, when you listen to it, it's a cool premise, and I really thought I would enjoy it because I also love reading books about characters who love music. So I definitely thought this would be up my alley, but just the direction that the story went just wasn't my cup of tea. But yeah, 3 out of 5 wasn't bad. Next was Half-Blood by Jennifer L. Armentrout, and this was a very like a guilty pleasure read for me because I've read a number of her books, and they're always very like, I love the first book in the series, I am okay with the second book, and then eventually I get bored and I'm like, whatever, I'm not going to finish this. So it's just very like guilty pleasure, but it doesn't like stick with you in the same way, I don't know, the same way other authors do. But I still find her writing very enjoyable. Like, it's trash, but it's my kind of trash, and I'm here to roll around in it, if you know what I mean. The reason I gave this 2 out of 5 is that it's almost a straight up copy of The Vampire Academy by Rochelle Mead, which, like, if you don't know, this is one of my favorite series of all times, and I've probably reread it like 3 or 4 times, if not more, let's be honest. I just love this series so much. Spiritbound, like, sequel is another story, but like this series is just so many good memories. It's so well written, so good. So you imagine my disgust when I read this book, when I read Half-Blood, and it's just like literally plot point by plot point a straight up copy. So I didn't give it 1 star because I still thought her writing was well done. It's just like, I enjoyed the story, but the whole time I was reading it, I was just like, this is exactly the same as Vampire Academy. It really is a copy. So the main characters are Alex, Alexandra, and Aiden. So Alex is a half-blood of the, what are they? Instead of vampires, it's like god-like creatures. So it's called hematoi. And they're like the offspring of gods, or like descended from the union of gods and mortals. So the hematoi have godlike powers, and a pure hematoi, which is like hematoi and hematoi, say that 5 times fast. The 2 of them having a kid together will also have the godlike powers, and they're considered pure. So that's what Aiden is, whereas Alex is her father's a hematoi, but her mother's just immortal. So she's a half-blood. And so they have basically only 2 options, which is to either protect and be guards for the purebloods, or to take this like vial of potion that like takes away their free will, and essentially they become mindless servants just working for the purebloods in the household, which, like, that's messed up. Like, this is another one of the reasons that it's just a worse book than Vampire Academy, is like, that would never fly because it's just not realistic. Like, can you imagine a whole society that functions on these half-bloods who their choices are either be guards and protect them or become mindless slaves, servants? Who would ever choose to be a servant? And the slightest punishment, like the slightest thing that they do wrong, the punishment is to become a servant and get your free will taken away. Anyways, this book was a roller coaster. And I was definitely, like, into it for a while. I was listening to the audiobook while I was just, like, doing stuff around the house. So I was able to, like, get into it. I definitely liked it enough to read the second book. But yeah, it was only a 2 out of 5 because of the blatant stealing. Book number 17 was another Chandler Ainsley recommendation. And I have to say, this did not fare any better than Raze. It was just equally as horrible and trashy, but not, like, a good trash. It was like I just want to take a shower because of how nasty that was. I'm reading my review and I actually said, okay, this book is toxic sludge. Yeah, like literally it's rated 4 stars on Goodreads and I gave it 1 out of 5 because I just like, it's not even one thing was bad, the whole thing was bad. The dialogue, the unrealistic characters, just the poorly written, like from a writing point of view, it was just poorly written. There's just nothing redeemable about this book. Like if you're just looking for porn, you know, there's other resources. You don't have to put yourself through this. Like, yeah, and the thing is, the premise of this sounded like really good, like I was into it. So it's a story about a girl who has been bullied by this boy when she was younger, and then she eventually moves away and thinks she's free of him. And then they meet again when they're in high school, and he, surprise, surprise, continues to bully her. Yeah, I can't remember what the girl's name is, but the guy's name is Vaughn. And so she is going to this like fancy boarding school in the UK, like outside of London somewhere, for the summer. Which just the premise of this was so dumb. It's like there's only 2 spots in this boarding school. Or no, there was only 1 spot in the boarding school, I think. And it was between her and Vaughn, the guy who bullies her. And I can't even remember which one of them won. I think he ends up winning, but she just tags along to like be his assistant, which like, okay, bleh. Because obviously the mean, smart, beautiful guy is deserving and the girl is just lucky to be there and be his assistant, right? Yeah, I just wasn't a fan of the gender dynamics in this. It was not my cup of tea. And also he was just like consistently like violently creepy and scary and mean to her. Like, I just don't understand why she was into him at all. Like, he literally bullies her. He's mean to her. I don't get why she would be into that. So anyways, it's just a lot of them being in this castle and like sculpting statues and stuff. And there's this vaguely romantic element that's more just like creepy and sexual in a not good way. At this point I was getting really discouraged about Chandler Ainsley's recommendations. I was like, I love you, girl, but I just don't know if I'm vibing with your books. I decided to read just one more of them, and that was Punk 57 by Penelope Douglas, which I think she said was like her favorite book by her favorite author. So I was like, surely this has to be good. She's saying it's like her favorite romance author of all time. She wouldn't recommend that much of a dumpster fire to us, would she? Apparently yes. The answer is yes. And I'm very sorry, Chandler. I respect the hell out of you, but like, we just have different book tastes, so I've just come to accept that. I love watching your videos, but I'm not into your romance books. The thing is though, I didn't like fully hate this. Like, the writing was okay. It's just that everything else wasn't that good. My complaints with the other 1-star books was just like, at their core, just the writing itself was bad and not well done. The dialogue wasn't good. So it's just, how can you even enjoy a book that's plot-wise bad when the writing, you can't even get past how bad the writing is. So this, at least the writing was okay. It was and the premise was very interesting as well. It's a story about 2 kids who become assigned as pen pals when they're young, and they have kind of gender neutral names. So the guy is Misha and the girl is Ryan, and the teachers assume that Misha's a girl and Ryan's a boy, and they pair each other up with them, which, like, okay, apparently you can't have a pen pal who's not your gender, whatever. So they become like best friends over the years, and they decide to never meet up with each other or like add each other on Facebook or anything, just to like keep the magic of the friendship alive. So even to the point where they're in high school, they don't know who each other is. Until one day, Misha meets Ryan at his band's, like a show that his band is doing, and he figures out who she is, but she doesn't figure out who he is. So he becomes like completely betrayed and horrified because she's not like the cool, I like Star Wars girl that she pretends to be in her letters. Instead, she's like a beautiful cheerleader, and he's like, ugh, she lied to me. She's just like those other bimbos. So he like gets really pissed off. And then there's something going on with his home life as well. So at one point he runs away and goes to live in an abandoned amusement park, which this is where the story went off the rails for me. Is that like he's literally like squatting in an abandoned amusement park and then breaks into her school to like take revenge on her or something. And she like clearly mentions multiple times that he looks like he's wearing the same clothes over and over again, and the clothes look rumpled and unwashed. And she's like okay with it because he happens to be hot. And this is one of those things where it's like, if you just subtract the hot guy with an average looking guy, suddenly it becomes creepy. This is not a hot guy who happens to be, you know, tortured. It's like a random teenager living on the street, not washing his clothing, taking you back to this creepy abandoned amusement park to hook up or whatever. And she's just like, seems legit. And yeah, I don't know why, but I just couldn't get behind it. The story kind of spirals from there, and there's also some like graffiti. That's like what the book is titled after. Is Punk 57 is the name of this graffiti artist who keeps like exposing secrets around the school. So it's a mystery who is being the graffiti artist. But yeah, I just gave it 2 out of 5 stars. It honestly was not that memorable to me. Although I did say in my review that I would be willing to read another Penelope Douglas book at some point, like when I've emotionally recovered from this one. So yeah, it wasn't all bad. It had its moments. Book number 20 was the cute little I Want My Hat Back by John Klassen, which is an adorable children's book. It's actually part of a series. I think there's 3 in total. And the reason I read this book is because I actually bought it for a friend of mine who gave birth earlier in the year. And I just thought it would be a cute little present for her new little baby. So of course I had to read it before I gave it to her. And I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. It was just, I mean, it's a kid's book. It's super cute. It's just a little bear who walks around trying to find his hat, and he asks all of the different forest creatures, have you seen my hat? Have you seen my hat? And then eventually he's like, oh, wait, I saw my hat back there, and something ominous happens, and it's really dark and adorable. And my friend messaged me after she read it to her kid, and she was like, what did you just send me? So yeah, that's books 11 to 20 that I read this year. So tune in next time when I talk about books 21 to 30. It's gonna be 10 books per episode, 10 episodes in total. Thanks for watching. See you next time.